part of the reason we changed the episode is that I have a new child, and I was reading it aloud just for fun. I mean, they can't understand anything yet, but to him and my wife. And I kept getting to the line in Joseph Jacobs' Catskin from the English fairy tales. Whenever Catskin, who is Cinderella, talks about wanting to go to the ball, every time the cook says, "What, you dirty, impudent slut? You go among all the fine lords and ladies with your filthy catskin? A fine figure you'd cut."
Here at Adaptive Difficulty, we pose the challenging question: books aren't movies, but what if they could be? This week, we are looking at A Cinderella Story, a 2004 comedy directed by Mark Rosman, written by Leigh Dunlap, and starring Hilary, Duff, and Chad Michael Murray, based on the 1697 French tale, Cinderella by Charles Perault.
Hello, I am Catskin, here with my co-host Donkey Skin.
Oh, I forgot about Donkey Skin. I almost made my children read that. That one's wild.
Okay, I'm actually Josh, here with
Cameron.
Where do you want to start?
I was going to say, this is not like what we originally planned on doing, but circumstances have forced us.
I think last main episode, we said it would be War of the Worlds. That is still upcoming. That episode will have some guests on it, so we are making sure to arrange so that everything works out well, and that is still coming. But for now, we're doing Cinderella.
Where do you stand on Cinderella?
It's not something I have a lot of opinion on. I don't think I had even seen the Disney movie until within the last few years, at least not all the way through. But I've always known the plot because it's Cinderella, the same as the way that fairy tales work. So actually, I think they did the touring Broadway version, came to our school while we were there, but it was like a woke Cinderella where they established a liberal democracy at the end. I'm familiar with. I'm familiar that it exists. I'm not familiar with it at all beyond that. It was like Rodgers and Hammerstein's music, but then they added the democracy angle. But they were still prince and princess, but then there were rabble-rousers that were like, we shouldn't have princes and princesses. We should be a democracy. And then at the end of the play, they became a democracy and were like, we elect this prince and princess. So
that's the way democracy works, Josh.
It was like that George Washington thing where he was like, I don't want to be called a king or whatever. I don't want to be a king and serve too long, except they just did exactly that.
I would say that I'm very familiar with the Disney version because it was one, I think we had all of them in all honesty, but I recall that one the most of the VHS versions of Disney animated movies. So I remember watching it all the time. And my mom was always into it because she liked the mice.
Yeah, that was my main takeaway when I finally did watch it a year or so ago. I was like, this is really a movie about some mice, and then Cinderella happens in the margins of it.
See, that is true, and it's very similar in the ways that Tom and Jerry and those movies work, where it's Tom and Jerry, and then in the background is the rest of the movie.
Yeah, that's a great reference. In case any of our viewers or listeners aren't familiar with Cinderella, compare it to the thing you're definitely familiar with, which is the Tom and Jerry parodies of modern movies that came out in the 2000s.
They've all seen our episode about Tom and Jerry and the Wizard of Oz. It's clearly not our
most popular episode ever.
It's not our least popular, I don't think.
And then as far as we both, and we've referenced this multiple times recently because it keeps coming up with what we choose to cover, we both took a class about metamorphosis in literature, and it covered fairy tales in depth. And I used the book that we used for that as my main source for what I read to prepare for this episode. In its section on Cinderella, I'd already read before. It's very interesting because it has the Brothers Grimm version, and it has some pretty traditional Chinese and Indian versions that pretty closely follow what you tend to see as Cinderella. And then it also has there's a second genre almost of stories, like Donkey Skin and Cat Skin, like I mentioned, where it adds this element of the Cinderella isn't just unrecognizable because she's a servant, but because she has chosen to wear an animal hide or leather and hide out.
I wonder if it emerges from the concept of animal brides and those stories with the Princess and the Frog.
Well, I was thinking about that because it's almost interesting how it's when you have the kind of masculine version where the man is the animal. It's a literal animal. And at least in Beauty and the Beast, like the woman just has to learn to live with the beastly thing before he transforms. But in the Cinderella stories, only ever a surface level disguise for a beautiful woman that the prince will get to marry.
It's very similar, and I'm not as familiar with this as I could be, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. The differences between like female saints and male saints in Catholicism and like what they're known for. Female saints tend to be a lot more like punishment oriented, where things like happening to them or they're doing things to kind of prevent other things from happening, and male saints typically aren't that way. So I wonder if there's an element of that kind of undergoing it, where the responsibilities and the expectations, men and women, leads into this kind of segmented kind of storytelling.
Yeah, the only thing that kind of complicates it is that there are Cinderella stories where a boy is the main character, like traditional ones, including the collection I'm talking about is the Classic Fairy Tales, Norton 2nd edition, edited by Maria Tatar. And she includes one with a boy main character. And also a lot of the Beauty and the Beast tales before Beauty and the Beast are like, I was forced to marry this chimp, and then I got mad and threw the chimp at the wall, and like a man popped out.
That one is wild.
Or Princess and the Frog tales, I mean, which are related, I guess. So I guess, and then the other thing of note in the collected versions, and I'm sure you didn't get too into this with your 8th graders, I hope, but there tends to be a king who's the father of the Cinderella, and there's some gambit that requires the king to marry his daughter. So it's like the original wife is, I'm dying, I'm sickly, and you may only marry someone who fits this ring of mine. Just like the glass slipper, except kind of a gross version of it. They search the whole kingdom to put this ring on someone, and the only person the ring fits is his own daughter, Cinderella. And then he becomes obsessed with marrying her, and Cinderella is like, I have to run away, I have to stop this. And that's an element in more than half of the ones in the collection I read.
That's why I didn't do Donkey Skin with my 8th graders, because I was like, they probably don't need the incestuous plot line.
Yeah, it is interesting to think, because it's like analysis in the book kind of talks about like that is almost too real, like that's too much of an actual threat to people, and that does happen. So it doesn't, eventually it no longer makes good fodder for a story. Whereas originally it either was just reality, it was warning girls that this could happen, or in some cases it was just like a body bar story, like kids weren't even the ones being told it. It was just like, oh, here's this shocking story to tell, over drinks.
It's like the versions of Little Red Riding Hood which involve her like giving a striptease to the wolf to distract them.
Yeah, I guess part of me as I watched this movie was tuned into like, I wonder if there's any like vestigial bit of that still in like,
I think there is,
the versions of Cinderella
I think there
that
is.
we tell.
At least there's a version of it.
I'll be interested to hear that, because I think mine was pretty lax on that. Cinderella was not a fairy tale that I was super exposed to as a kid. I remember I think I knew Rumpelstiltskin better, and I had Snow White on VHS and watched that more than I did Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast. So this was not one that I like it fine, but it's almost like when you read a fairy tale, mostly as an adult, like what does liking it even mean? It's just like an object of curiosity, not like something I would be, oh, this is good or bad. So
I kind of see that, but I definitely have read versions of Cinderella that I don't like, or that I think are maybe problematic in some ways, and I would not read them to my child. Do you know the Russian version of Cinderella? It's called like the Golden Slipper or whatever. They have the Cinderella character and they have a sister, and the sister is constantly described as an idle slut for like the entirety of like 10 pages.
Yeah, I was just about to. So I actually was reading this aloud, not to get too much into my personal life, but part of the reason we changed the episode is that I have a new child, and I was reading it aloud just for fun. I mean, they can't understand anything yet, but to him and my wife. And I kept getting to the line in Joseph Jacobs' Catskin from the English fairy tales. Whenever Catskin, who is Cinderella, talks about wanting to go to the ball, every time the cook says, "What, you dirty, impudent slut? You go among all the fine lords and ladies with your filthy catskin? A fine figure you'd cut." And it happens so often that by like the third or fourth time it happens, the narration is like, just like the last time, he called her a dirty slut. Like, it just like summarizes it and moves on.
And like, I recognize that word has a different meaning when they were writing this, but like, it's so incomprehensible that like, I can't do it. And the only reason that I know that the Russian version has this is because I was using a bunch of versions of Cinderella from around the world with my students. And thank God that I previewed and read through them before I decided to print them out and like give them to students, because that one would probably have gotten me fired.
Another thing the book points out is that everybody talks about the Brothers Grimm being so dark and edgy with like the cutting off the heels and stuff. And it points out that actually like there's one version in the book where the evil stepsister is boiled alive in a cauldron until she's just bones. And then the bones are served up to the stepmother, and she's convinced that it's just a stew, and she eats her child. So it just points out that the Brothers Grimm version is actually somewhat sanitized already compared to some versions that came before it. And I think this is a pet peeve we both have, which is people having this impression that the Brothers Grimm is the original version or the primary version, just based on their name recognition alone.
Well, I honestly think that for a lot of people, it comes down to Disney being the primary version that they all experience as children or whatever. And as they grow up, they want to distance themselves from that past, whether they're like an edgy teenager or an edgy adult or an edgy Reddit person. And so they're like, well, actually, the original version is dark and grim, and people lose body parts all the time. And that's cooler than what I liked when I was a child.
Yeah, and I think it's also the Disney version is what people know as the story, but everybody knows in the back of their head that that's not the original because it's a fairy tale. So, and when you think of most stories or adaptations like we cover, there is one source. So I think it's natural to kind of just think you found it and then stick to it.
That's fair.
Although in Cinderella's case, it's a little more complicated because there is a Brothers Grimm version, but I would say Charles Perrault's version, which really is the source of the Disney movie, like directly, and it is written and like he changed it a lot, so he is kind of the author of it, is just as famous or at least as famous as the Brothers Grimm.
Well, I almost feel, and this is partly, I feel like it's partly Disney's fault, where if Disney didn't base their movie off of the Charles Perrault version, his version wouldn't be as famous.
But it would have been hard to do donkey skin or cat skin. So
yeah. Maybe back before Disney was so closely associated with children, they could have done it. But now that that's their target audience, it's not possible anymore.
Another detail that I was on the lookout for, just kind of thinking of like the common themes I noticed as I read each version of the story, a lot of them have some sort of animal or element that is obviously a metaphor for like the original mother helping out the protagonist, Cinderella. Yeah. Like there's a Chinese one where there's a fish that helps her. Or there's the version, I think it's the Grimm Brothers version, where she plants like a tree that helps her out. So I was kind of looking out for if I saw any element of that in the adaptation.
The Philippines version, I want to say it's the Philippines, where her mother dies and turns into a crab, and then they eat the crab, and then they plant the crab bones or shell, and it grows into a tree, and her mother's in a tree.
Yeah, and there's also one where Cinderella herself is like killed, then comes back to life as a sort of a ghost, and then like the ghost is like turned into bones. Like she goes through like 5 different transformations, but is still alive.
I think that might be the Korean version. I feel like I recall that one happening.
Then the last common thread I picked up on was, and I'm not saying I picked up on it because the essay in the book I read mentions it too, but like Cinderella, obviously she's typically a servant doing either like cooking or janitorial work or the scullery maid, whatever. So she's doing women's work, but then she uses some sort of women's work as how she gains freedom. So in several of the versions, she has like a ring or a piece of jewelry of the prince and then bakes him a cake and serves him the cake or the tart. And he finds the ring in there and he's like, oh, okay, so this must be my princess from the ball, because who else would have this ring that I gave her? So I was also on the lookout to see if anything like that survived into whatever version we ended up watching. And those were kind of my main takeaways for what is a consistent theme that I was interested in as I read these.
As with any fairy tale, for me, I mainly focus on the magical element because it's so interesting how wide and varied the magic can be. Sometimes it's like familiar magic where the magic is related to you. Sometimes it's animal magic or natural magic. Sometimes it's like divine magic and it's coming from God or because you're a pious person or whatever. And so I find it interesting to compare like when these stories were written and where they're written in the cultural context and how they're viewing magic and how they're treating magic as like an exception to the reality, as part of reality, as, you know, directly responsible for things, that kind of thing. So I'm always interested to see, and I kind of didn't expect there to be magic in this version because I feel like in the 2000s era, magic is kind of pulled a lot from these adaptations of fairy tales because it's seen as like childish, and so you want a grown-up teenager version of this movie. You're not going to have magic in it because that's for children or whatever. So I'm always interested to see when they decide to include magic and when they decide to don't.
Yeah, and it's interesting with these because off the top of my head, I think there's maybe at least a couple of the traditional stories that aren't directly magical. Nothing about the story requires magic in just the basic plot beats of, you know, trodden upon daughter goes to a ball, falls in love with the prince has to identify her in some bizarre way. I guess, at least in some of them, the most magical thing is when she like insists on, I need a dress that's the color of the sky, and they grab a feather from every bird in existence or whatever.
Yeah.
So that is still magical. Any more on the fairy tales before we go into the movie?
Not that I immediately want to bring up, because I think if there are a couple things that I might bring up as we talk about some of this movie version, but not enough to like stall talking about the movie.
My opening point is pretty irrelevant. So what is yours?
My opening point's also kind of irrelevant, which is like, this is the most 2000s movie I think I've seen in maybe 20 years.
Yeah, I guess mine is kind of tangential to that, which is they do like 3 different cold opens to a like power pop song within 10 minutes.
Yeah.
The third time it happens, I was like, they should have picked one.
Well, there's like 2 different montages in this movie.
Because it starts with the mountains and her father, and then he dies, and then it's like the montage of her stepsisters and mom, and there's music underlying that, and then she goes to school, and there's music underlying that. They needed all of those scenes narratively, but they did not have to do very similar songs, but different songs under every single
No,
one.
I'm not an expert on music, but I just feel like there were a lot of songs in the 2000s that just sounded exactly like each other. So, and that's true for today, but
I guess to state the obvious so that people can follow along, you never see the original mother. Her father is kind to her and encouraging of her interests, reads her fairy tales, and then dies in a weather incident.
it's an earthquake because they're in California.
And so everything gets bequeathed to, at least so we think, to Jennifer Coolidge, who is the horrible stepmother, and her 2 daughters. And I guess at this point, since we brought up the father, where are you coming from with, you said you think there is a little bit of that vestigial incest plot line?
Oh, okay. So it's not incest so much it is like an unhealthy power dynamic kind of thing. And this happens like halfway through the film, like after they meet and he's trying to find her again. Austin Ames trying to find Sam again. They had like that weird game show, and then the teacher comes around and like tells him to stop, and he's like, or she's like, David, you're a terrible person. And then she kind of like flirts a little bit with Ryan, where she's like, hi, Ryan. And she like bats her eyes very prettily. And it was just a very weird like dynamic to have between a teacher and like him, a student. So that's what I was saying when I was saying it's like,
oh, okay. So it was just problematic age gaps also came up in this movie. That does not seem descended from the fairy tale to me. I have to say.
I mean, it's still in the same regard of like inappropriate relationships existing. Although this one feels like it exists more for a joke and less so as a obvious acknowledgement of the threat.
And so they introduce all that setup. She goes to school, and pretty quickly you realize she has like a friend. And I felt bad for this guy because he was like Carter, her friend, because he gets a girl in the end, and he is, I guess, sexually active. But the way they treat him as Sam's friend is like, he is like a sexless, like, critter. Like, he's just like,
I don't think that's true. I mean, he is a sidekick. He reminds me a lot of Justin. I kept looking at him like, this is like Justin's hair.
Okay.
Like, doesn't he look just like him? Like, couldn't you imagine like Justin in like high school or whatever looking like that? I mean, he's supposed to be the nerd, and he's also very into theater and whatnot. And I just feel like I don't really see him as a sexless kind of attachment, because I think his primary drive is to get a girlfriend. So I never really got that vibe from him.
I almost felt like they gave him a girlfriend at the end because they felt like they had written him so mean.
I think I have problems with his character, because I think one of the themes of this movie is you should be yourself, but he's just kind of a joke for a lot of it.
But he's an actor. He's
exactly. And then at the very end, very end, she's like, "Who are you dressed up as today?" And he's like, "Myself. I think I like that the best for you." And this feels so tonally inconsistent with like the theme. And it comes down to this idea of this movie exists for like teenagers in high school or whatever. And so of course it's, one of the major themes is going to be yourself, don't worry about other people. But there's still that undercurrent of like, there's a socially acceptable amount of like deviance from the norm that they're still trying to enforce in this movie. Like, he can't be a full-fledged theater kid and be kind of goofy and dorky and like it. He has to, become a successful actor and be kind of a star. He has to do things, and he has to be kind of popular.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. Then is Ryan the really strange one?
Ryan is, you mean the guy who's played by Howard Wolowitz? Guess. Ryan is one of the jock friends.
Okay, well, anyway, the next thing they do is introduce a really strange guy, like super geeky in his own world. There was the briefest moment where I thought maybe it was going to be a movie about her falling in love with him.
I mean, they had that fake out scene where he ends up pretending to be the guy she's supposed to be meeting. And at first I was like, are they actually doing this? And I was like, well, they showed us earlier that it was Austin Ames who was doing it. And I'm like, there's no way this movie in 2004 has enough guts to be like, yeah, you should date the nerd as like a major theatrical release.
And then, but pretty quickly, they introduce Austin Ames, played by Chad Michael Murray, who is Prince Charming of the movie.
Terry is the nerd's name.
Okay. And my first note I made after that all was established, they're like IMing each other and texting each other anonymously. I just thought it was interesting that almost every interest they give her is stereotypically masculine. She's interested in baseball and dresses to some degree tomboyish, at least at the beginning of the movie. She wears like caps and stuff. And then he is not feminine necessarily, but he is like a romantic writer type. And I don't know, it feels like the movie doing work to make a fairy tale more acceptable, I guess, in the modern day. Like, yeah, well, like it's a traditional love story with gender roles, but girls can like baseball. Like,
well, yeah, they have that line, like she's playing baseball outside and he's like, and she hits the ball really far, and one of Austin's friends is like, wow, can you believe a girl hit that? And I'm like, okay, we're in 2004 time. But also, I mean, I think that's true, except it's not that he doesn't like, I mean, he likes all the masculine things, like he likes playing football and whatnot. He just also wants to be a writer and doesn't want to be like determined by someone else. He wants to be self-determining.
I'm not trying to overdo it with calling writing a feminine thing, because like obviously throughout history, it was mostly men who had the privilege to even be able to do it.
The most I think about this in terms of like the gender expectations was that sequence, like that kind of first little sequence where they're kind of IMing each other. And he's like, I really want to meet you. He's like, you're not a dude, right? Because if you are, I'll beat you up. And I'm like, okay, gay panic is still alive in 2004.
I didn't catch that. I caught the part about you're not a dude, right? But I didn't catch the threat.
He doesn't say it in like a seriously threatening way, but I think that's more because having actual threats in this romantic comedy would just be tonally inconsistent. So I think they just kind of played it off as a little bit of a joke, but the threat is still there.
And then there is a Halloween dance coming up, and that is arranged to be where Prince Charming and the main character, Cinderella, will meet for the first time. They don't know who each other are. But Cinderella can't go because she works at her stepmom's diner and is required to be there all night. So that was very straight up how the fairy tale goes. Stepmom saying, you can't go for these reasons. You have to do work in the scullery. And then her fairy godmother that dresses her up anyway and lets her go is sort of everybody else who works at the diner.
Yeah. I mean, it's like primarily Rhonda is like the main, like the face of it, but it's like everyone else who works at the diner that her dad used to own. They're all people who like her dad and just kind of do it because they're trying to be nice and they want to respect like her dad and continue working on the place he loved and worked at. But they all hate her.
Yeah, I was a little skeptical of this when I started to realize that it was primarily Rhonda, because it's like, oh, the one relevant black woman in the whole movie is a magical being that will, or the equivalent of a magical being that will just help Cinderella. I think the fact that all of the diner helps her kind of helps smooth that out and make it less racially tinged. Not really my subject to dwell on.
Yeah, but this movie does has a weird amount. I don't know if weird is the correct word. It has a weird amount of racial undertones. There's all kinds of. The mom character is clearly supposed to be like a racist caricature. Like she calls Rhonda Betty Crocker from the hood or whatever, and you're supposed to not like her for that. But there's other things like the stepsisters, their cars, like their little horn sounds are like the Battle Hymn of the Republic and like Dixie. And I just don't know where like this is like coming from. It's like
one of them's the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and one of them
is like when they're
Dixie.
first going to the car wash.
So are they on opposite
I don't
sides
know.
of the Civil War? Sister against sister in the Cinderella story.
But isn't it weird that like that's like a thing that's happening? Like,
yeah, it's weird that there's so many like very minor, unremarked on references to like racial strife in this extremely otherwise innocent 2000s teen comedy. Okay, and then she makes it to the dance. She is like the shock of the ball because she's so dressed up and pretty for it. And nobody knows who she is because she's wearing a masquerade. And I was thinking this as like, I don't find that credible that people did not know who she was. And I guess the point they're trying to make is that people didn't know who she was in the first place.
Yeah, well, I think that, but also like after they have this kind of Halloween party, he's like searching for her. Like several characters go up to him and being like, "It's me, I'm the princess," when they're clearly like a different height, different like hair, different hair color, different hairstyle, like.
And you could say, well, maybe she was wearing a wig or extensions, but very different hair and shape, and yeah. And also, I was thinking, should this not bother me because this is based on a fairy tale and the fairy tale's not realistic? But then the more I thought about it, every version of the fairy tale has a better justification for why the prince can't recognize her than this movie does.
But I think it's more appealing. It's there to appeal to people who feel invisible in their kind of school environment.
Yeah. I'm just saying they should have had her like always put her hair up into a hat or something as a normal school kid, or wear glasses,
I guess I could see that being happening. But then you fall into the trope of like the classic trope of ugly girl is only ugly when she's wearing glasses and has her hair up. I think we get enough of that, but
although maybe that would have made her more recognizable because then she would have something around her eyes, just like when she's at the ball. And then, but anyway, she meets Prince Charming. She never admits who she is as she meets him in the
I like
scene.
that fact. I like the asymmetric knowledge that they have.
Yeah, it didn't bother me. And that is how the story goes, generally. Like in the traditional fairy tale, she knows that that's the prince of the land and the prince doesn't know who she is. So it makes sense. And they do it well in the movie where it's like flirtatious for her to not say, And then they go outside. And then there's a pet peeve of mine, which is that the prince asks if she wants to play 20 questions. 20 questions is a game where you think of a secret thing and then you ask yes or no questions to figure out what that thing is. People just mean, do you want to ask each other personal questions? And then they call it 20 questions.
Except in this case, there's like a very clear, like, I want to know who you are kind of thing. So I'm going to guess who you are at the end. So it feels more justified to be a 20 questions game.
But people say this outside of this movie too. And it's always bothered me.
That's fair, Josh. That's your own personal cross to bear. I think, honestly, I wrote this line down and we can talk about it because I think it's actually somewhat interesting. The line he says, like he asked her if she would rather have a Big Mac or a rice cake. And she's like, I'd rather have a Big Mac. And she's like, why'd you ask me that? And he's like, I like a girl with a healthy appetite. And how do you feel about the relationship between dieting, body shaming, and
that? There were some elements of that, and that is very the early 2000s were super skinny in terms of like what the fad appearance was. Because there's also the scene where the stepsisters try to order, they're like, what do you have at this diner that has no sugar, no carbs, and no fat? It's kind of this impossible thing where being as skinny as possible was the trend of the 2000s, but also if you cared too much about it, then you weren't the cool girl anymore, and movies were going to be fun of you too.
I mean, this comes out with, I think there's no case of winning, because I think this comes down to, with his stepmother, it's like a character who is seemingly on a diet, the salmon diet or whatever, and the joke is that she's ugly and overweight, and her dieting is pointless, and she gets Botox, but she's still ugly kind of thing. at least in the context of the film. And then you have the other popular girl characters who don't eat anything and are super skinny, but are like vapid and unoriginal and have no thoughts. And then you have Hilary Duff's character who eats a Big Mac and gets the prince. And it's just very like, and I recognize this from the time, but it's the part of this movie that has aged the worst for me in terms of like viewing it. Like I've never seen this movie before, but I could see how 2004 me, which I guess I was 5, so I wouldn't have seen this movie, wouldn't have any thoughts about it, but I could see myself understanding that kind of humor more so back then.
Yeah. So they meet, he never finds out who she is, but she knows who he is because he was perfectly visible. And then the next relevant thing I have is that they're messaging and she's about to say her name and then gets distracted. And the stepsister comes in and sees that this is going on. And that's where somebody else finds out what's happening. But my main thought during this was the stepsister should have messaged her name if she really wanted, like, if that was really her end goal.
Yeah, but they're supposed to be dumb characters. So they're not supposed to think they're playing it through well anyway.
I was just thinking, and it leads to like the car wash scene where they end up going through the car wash outside of the car. So there's a dramatic reason that the way it worked out. But I was just thinking, honestly, it would have been more dramatic and harder for the protagonist to overcome if she had done this thing I'm thinking of that she should do right now.
Yeah, but I mean, we kind of get both worlds in this, because after they fail to do the car wash thing, they do the plan later on. So I think you get enough dramatic tension and fun hijinks in what we got.
And then this is where I started to kind of have an overall thought as I was watching the movie, because this movie is so heightened, not just in being a fairy tale, but also in like the teen reality, because you have like football star, homecoming queen type, bullies, the super weird kid who's like completely detached from reality. And I started to think it's almost pulling as much and doing sort of an adaptation of teen movies, or like a broad pastiche of teen movies, as much as it is Cinderella as a fairy tale. It's almost an adaptation of both of those concepts into one thing, which obviously it is. That's the whole premise, is what if Cinderella was a teen movie? But and maybe I'm trying to make up for the fact that the teen world does not feel completely honest or lived in this movie.
It comes down to, and this is just true for I think all teen movies from the 2000s, where their conception of high school is someone who's not been to high school in 20 years and has no concept of like how cliques work or how people talk or how they act or any kind of that kind of stuff.
As I was watching, have you seen Clueless?
Yes.
I kept thinking back to Clueless, and like Clueless is a heightened movie with very specific language to that movie, but I think Clueless feels more legitimately interested in the characters that it's writing about and has a lot more action. It's a better movie, I'll just say that. And it has a lot more actual affection for its characters, to the point where it overcomes that. And like, even though it is more heightened in some ways, it feels more real because it makes the characters more real. Whereas in this movie, I was struggling with whether I just didn't find the characters very realistic, or if they were almost archetypes because they were almost turning the teen movie into sort of a fairy tale archetypal format.
Well, for me, and this comes down to, I think, just kind of a difference in culture, where I think most of the main characters felt fleshed out. Like I like Austin, I like Chad Michael Murray's character, I like Hilary Duff's character, I like the guy who plays the best friend. And then the villains are kind of one-dimensional kind of characters. And I almost feel like that's just because it makes it easier for us to be appreciating that they're like punished in the end, which is not something that happens in the Charles Perault version, where she forgives her sisters and helps them and gets them married in courts to lords and to other lords or other important people in court. Whereas I think what happens with a lot of fairy tale adaptations, especially in the modern day, is we're no longer satisfied with stories of patience being rewarded so much as we are wanting wickedness being punished. So it's not enough for Cinderella to get her reward. It now requires the stepsisters to be punished in some way, or the stepmom to be punished in some way. So I think part of that is like why those characters are so flat and one-dimensional and so obviously the butt of all the jokes, is because, well, why would you care about them? You're not supposed to like them. They're villains. Like, she deserves this. Like, she deserves to be made fun of. She deserves to, have her eating disorder, joked about at the dinner table when she's like, laxatives aren't a food group or whatever. And I think it comes down to its target audience being teenagers who don't have the best concept of what morality is.
Yeah. Then the next thing is, at least for me, the next thing was they harp on the fact that she works at a diner a lot. And I just couldn't help but think, like, working at a diner as a high schooler is not embarrassing. Even popular kids do that. I'm thinking about, like, and I know this is not like the end-all reference of how high school life actually was in the 90s, but Twin Peaks, there's a character that works in the diner and nobody cares at all about that fact. And I just can't imagine that I would have cared when I was in high school. And I guess the point really overall is, oh, you have to work instead of not needing to work during high school. And I couldn't tell if that was, it goes back to, like, is that an honest feature of that character, or is it kind of revealing the screenwriter's bias of thinking that having to work during high school would be such a faux pas?
It strikes me as being more of the writer's bias, because I feel like it doesn't really impact the story in any capacity, or doesn't really contribute to the theme in any way. Because it's not like she's okay, like, she doesn't want to work at the diner. No one thinks that the job is a good job for her to have. She magically gets out of it at the end.
But you can imagine a version where there's just like a diner in town that she happens to be a waitress at.
Yeah.
And no one would care. And as far as the kids at school know, that's what it is. She just works as a waitress at a diner. Also, there's a scene where they're insulting her, and the final insult they use is servant girl. And there's just no reason that they would have ever called her that, other than the fact that this is based on Cinderella.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I'm willing to give them a pass on that one. Because this is the scene where, like, and this is so wild to me, and I love catty drama stuff in, like, teen movies, because they go so over the top. What's happening is they're putting on a skit, so they're at a pep rally.
Yeah, they've all figured out, at least the cheerleaders have figured out what's going on, where the two people who are IMing, that it's Sam and Austin, and then you can finish the explanation.
And so they're putting on a skit where they're making fun of primarily Sam, but also Austin as well. And it's, like, so over the top, and, like, the stepsisters are involved, and I'm like, this could never happen at an actual pep rally, because no one would actually give a shit about them putting on a skit.
No one would care about the skit. And honestly, at least by the time I was in high school, nobody would care about those two being romantically interested in each other. Again, it's very, like, I went to high school in the 80s coded. It makes me, it's one of those things where, like, you see people talk about The Breakfast Club, and The Breakfast Club's a perfectly good movie. I like it. But people talk about how, like, it's so realistic. And I'm just like, I don't feel like high school was that clique-based by the time, at least by the time I was in high school. Like, yes, people were in groups and there were bullies, but I feel like it was much more fluid than that movie shows.
And I think that's probably just a kind of a product of the progress of, like, how society has moved forward. Because I think that there definitely is the case where it was very cliquey. And my grade in particular, whenever I was in high school, was actually very cliquey. And no one really intermingled between the different groups all that much. So we really were kind of like the Mean Girls kind of lunch table, you know. And there's some overlap, because of course there was, but you kind of kept to your own lane. And we had no interest. We weren't really mean to each other. We just didn't really talk to each other.
Yeah, I guess that seems more realistic than what some people portray it as. And it's very, like, it's just a thought I've always had. It's like, The Breakfast Club is good, but it's not this, like, super relatable, this is exactly how high school is movie, which is how people pitch it. And I almost feel like that's not fair to it. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. My thoughts, I don't have any more thoughts until they actually get together at the end. So do you have anything between now and
the
then?
scene where they all stand up to the stepmom, and she, like Sam's, you know, quits and refuses and moves out, and then Rhonda quits, and then everyone else in the diner quits, and then all the customers leave. I like that scene because I think it ties into, I don't know, it feels better for all those characters to actually recognize what a terrible person she is and, like, stand by their convictions and do the right thing kind of situation, as opposed to just it only mattering to, you know, Sam's character.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a more appropriate revenge to get on her than, like, pecking her eye out.
Which never really made sense to me why she decided to keep Rhonda and all them, because, I mean, just fire them and get new people. You'll be fine. It's a diner.
Nobody wants to work these days, Cameron.
This was 2004, Josh. We've got a financial crisis on the horizon.
Yeah, nobody knew at that point. Then we get to kind of the low point of the movie, because Austin and Sam witnessed this mockery of them. And I honestly struggled to understand why Austin was so mad here, because I was thinking they were both insulted. But according to Wikipedia, it's because Austin feels that Sam did not, like, stand up for him.
Is that what Wikipedia says?
Something like that.
I didn't get that that vibe. I got more that he's just kind of embarrassed because they're talking about him and he knows that he's being talked about and he's worried that his dad's going to find out that he wants to go to Princeton and not go play football at USC.
They're both embarrassed. Austin especially is being bitchy about it. And this is the low point of the movie. This was one thing I was thinking, because I was thinking about Kurt Vonnegut has this thing. It was like supposed to be his English thesis that never got graded or passed, where he was like, there's like 8 shapes that stories can be. And one of the shapes is Cinderella, where you start at the bottom because you're a scullery maid, and things just keep getting better for you because you have a fairy godmother and you meet a prince and the prince chooses to marry you. And that's like one of the archetypal stories that we have, is someone starts at the bottom and gets to keep moving up. And I was just thinking that is a very boring plot for a movie. Like, it works as a 3-page fairy tale, but how are you going to add like a dramatic shape to the movie itself? And this was the answer, is they have this, like, they get bullied and that's their low point, the climax of the movie that they have to overcome. So I just thought that was interesting. And then they go to the big football game, which I thought was a little odd because I knew he was a football player, but this is the first time in the whole movie they've shown any football.
Yeah, there were several moments that I'm like, okay, when I first started this film, I heard about the Halloween dance and I was like, okay, that's going to be where they're going to meet for the first time. I was right about that. And then I was like, okay, they're going to have a pep rally. I was like, is the pep rally where they're going to have it happen? Because this is what happens in the movie Easy A. They have the pep rally, and that's when she can like confesses like her story to them, and that kind of like that's in the last like 10 minutes of that film, and then she gets with the guy later on. So that part, I was like, maybe they're going to do it at the pep rally, and then the pep rally was a skit thing, and I'm like, okay. And then the football thing just does come out of nowhere because you're like, why do I actually care?
Yeah, and they're playing the football game. Everything's going reasonably well, and then finally Austin stops the play and decides he needs to run to the bleachers and confess his love and forgive Sam, which obviously is a big dramatic movie moment, but it was really like, there was no like clock on this confession, and you do care about football, so why didn't you keep playing football? Like, why did you choose this exact moment?
Well, she's getting up and going away because she can't handle being in that situation where they're all cheering for Austin. And so I think he's recognizing, honestly, I kind of like this decision because it's no longer like some arbitrary clock deadline. It's him recognizing that she's suffering because of the situation and is willing to make a sacrifice of his own accord. Like, so it's not like he has a deadline, he's pushed to do it. He's like, I'm going to choose to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it works fine. So that's when they finally confess and get together, essentially. And there's been a drought throughout the movie, which I haven't mentioned yet. And as they kiss, it rains for the first time since whenever this drought started. That is the mother figure watching over.
Oh, okay. See,
Sam.
that's not how I interpreted the scene. I interpreted the scene as a Macbeth kind of scene where the proper order has been restored, and therefore the natural world's coming back in us.
Yeah, that's probably closer to what they were actually thinking when they wrote it in, or like with the Lion King, where it's like the proper king is in place, so now the world looks
like
better
it also
again.
ties into like right before Sam stands up to her stepmother, like the dad's diner was like a classic kind of diner look and aesthetic and had all kinds of stuff on the walls, and then once he passes away and the stepmom gets control of it, she turns it into like a 1960s disco hop kind of Riverdale,
like a 50s roller diner.
And then eventually some of the fabric comes down and reveals the final wallpaper. And I was like, oh, this is also like the universe trying to correct itself by changing the environment. So that's why I was like, that's where I was at. Whereas like the true king has been restored to the throne kind of thing. So the natural world is better.
Then kind of the next major plot beat, because the movie's wrapping up at this point, is she looks in her fairy tale book that her dad used to read to her and finds his actual will. She previously thought he did not have a will, but it had been hidden from her, and her stepmom had even witnessed it, and everything was supposed to be bequeathed to Sam, and her stepmother just stole it all. And I thought this was interesting. I mean, obviously it's just there as a, ironic reversal of fortune. The good guy wins in the end. But a lot of the fairy tale versions have a scene where, and they tend to be the ones where the king was trying to be incestuous, but that's not here nor there. But at the end, the king shows up and sees his daughter, who he had lost for a while, with the prince, and the king tends to go, oh, this is a good marriage. Here you can have the land, the kingdom, and I bless your marriage. And I thought it was an interesting way to add a parallel to that scene, even though the dad is dead. He sort of is from the grave. It like mirrors this giving of his kingdom to her. with the discovery
and
of the
it
will.
is in the fairy tale book that he's like read to her as a child from. Although it brings up the weird question of like, it's clear that she's hiding the will. Or I got the impression the stepmom hid the will. It makes it seem like she hid it in that book, which seems odd to me. But maybe she just...
Yeah, but why would she hide it in like the most likely place for Sam to sentimentally go back to?
We didn't even bring up the fact that she forged a rejection Princeton letter, which is... I love characters, that evil characters that are just evil and just like have no qualms being as terrible as they are. And so I like the stepmom's character in this, but it's just it's very funny to me to go to not only see your stepdaughter's Princeton letter and be like, acceptance letter, and be like, I'm not going to show her that, but then to go and forge a fake letter as if not hearing back would be just enough for her.
And now that I'm thinking about it, it really does have some weird like daddy-daughter rivalry things coming from her. When you have this setup where the dad is dead, everything was supposed to be bequeathed to the daughter, but then the stepmom is like, I should have everything the daughter was going to have, so I get all her stuff, and I'll make sure her life is miserable. Like, my husband's daughter, were competing for his affection with me, so now I will make your life miserable. Which I guess is the undertone of all the evil stepmothers in Cinderella tales, but...
Yeah. I now that I'm thinking about it, there's that scene where she's like sunbathing, and it's clear she's like sunbathing naked because they're like Sam's character gets startled whenever she like stands up or whatever. And so I wonder if that's also kind of supposed to be there as kind of like I'm a sexual threat, or I'm not gonna let you be a sexual threat to my husband, your father, kind of thing.
Yeah, who is dead,
and
was a kindly man. The last thing to go back to where I kind of said the last element I was kind of waiting to see if it showed up in any way. Was the whole like women's work being a way to free her in the end. No, that doesn't really come up. But she does end up owning the diner, and so she kind of girl bosses, I guess, at the end. Instead.
And this brings up to your point of like, what's the writer's position? Is it like, what's the position on work in this movie? It's clearly supposed to just be a punishment because that's how they punish the stepmother and stepdaughters. They make them work at the diner.
Yeah, working is a punishment. Being a member of the bourgeoisie and owning a restaurant is your like a rewarding position.
And is that not like so? I mean, is that not Cinderella?
And then, yeah, that is interesting. It is very not. I don't know what the right word to call it. It's very capitalist, I guess.
The only thing that it's the very last thing is like she's having the final monologue where she's like, I'm dating Austin. We're moving to Princeton. We're gonna live happily ever after. And she's like, for now. And she's like, what? I'm only a freshman. So I don't know. This is still kind of in the early 2000s kind of critique of like fairy tales where you can't just be happy in a marriage or a relationship. You have to be doing other things. Because there's that line at the very beginning whenever her father's like, fairy tales aren't just about marrying princes. They're about fulfilling your dreams and being yourself or whatever. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, this feels like the kind of very basic kind of critique of Disney where you're like, that happens in the early 2000s where like, they're not good representation and role models for women or whatever because they just tell you to get with a man.
Yeah. It's very like modern Disney critiquing itself where Frozen's like, you can't marry a man you just met 10 minutes ago. Or when they do the remakes and now the Beast has a tragic backstory because it's wrong to, fall in love with a man who's mean when you first meet him. And which it's like, there's always a kernel of a point to all this. Like, yes, those things are true. But it can just be a story sometimes.
And so that last like line where she's like, what? I'm only a freshman. It's like, it's that one last little lampshade on the kind of concept of the fairy tale where you're like, we're going to live happily ever after. I know that seems like a weird thing, but we're going to ignore that part for now. We're going to point and laugh at that.
Yes. I was trying to see what else the writer of this has done. Several direct-to-video sequels. One book called Bless Your Heart. Working class detective clashes with wealthy moms. Which side is she on? That's the question.
Well, usually a detective, you're on the detective side, so maybe this is like the redemption arc.
Wait, though. So she has to deal with the Buckhead Bettys, the insufferably entitled women of Georgia's most affluent zip code. Is it the old money queen of Buckhead, the mysterious new girl in town, the drug-dealing trophy wife? Then it says, Shay's investigation will make her examine her own prejudices and discover that as women and mothers, she might not be that different from the Bettys after all. So it's, at least based on the blurb, it's a book about overcoming your classism against rich people.
Well, at least she's internally consistent.
We really clocked her in this one. It's okay, Leigh Dunlap. your movie was pretty good.
I was honestly surprised how much I liked this movie.
So yeah, we can go on to rating it, I guess. So first, and this is a very broad question because this has been done a lot, but if you were to adapt Cinderella, the fairy tale stories, into a movie, how hard would that be? And we do that by comparing it to a video game. So for example, an easy one would be Kirby because it's easy to beat a Kirby game. And a hard one would be Donkey Kong because those games are hard. Where would we be?
On some level, I feel like it has to be, I feel very Kirby-ish. I could see it being a Yoshi, which is one step above. Because, I mean, there's lots of different examples of adaptations of fairy tales. And it has kind of the necessary parts to it. The only thing that would make it maybe a little bit more difficult is getting it to be a movie that makes sense in like today's age. I think requires some shifting around of some things where I feel like you need a more direct antagonist than what happens in a lot of Cinderella stories.
Yeah, I think I would say Yoshi for the reason I mentioned earlier, which is that the actual fairy tale is a very flat upward trajectory, which does not sustain a movie for very long. So I'm saying if you're making a feature-length movie, because even Disney's Cinderella is technically feature-length, but it's like 60 minutes. And a lot of those minutes are mice. It's like 40 mice minutes to 20 fairy tale minutes, which is really what this movie needed, was some more mice minutes to keep things padded out. Well, when Carter is on screen, that's a mouse minute.
I mean, listen, Carter, stops a sexual assault going on, so we stand him.
And then, so having established that turning Cinderella into a feature-length movie is roughly as hard as beating a Yoshi game, do we think this movie beat the game, didn't manage to beat the game, completed it all the way, 100%?
I would say beat it, but I mean, what are your thoughts?
I would say beat it for kind of the reasons I already said earlier, which is I think it's a good movie, it's fun, the ways it maps to the fairy tale are fun to notice, and generally makes sense. There's some interesting characters. I like the two leads and Carter, the mouse. But I think it just lacks that little extra bit of like that je ne sais quoi that like Clueless or Mean Girls has that really like puts a teen comedy to the next level. That like the affection and depth of character for its characters and elements like that. Like I feel like this movie, it feels a little perfunctory in parts, I guess.
I guess like I could see this movie being a lot better. I think the stepmom could stay the same in terms of like how flat she is, because I think that's probably fine. I would maybe like a little bit more depth from the popular girls, a little bit more depth from the stepsisters, and then maybe that would push it into it being a complete kind of thing for me. So I guess I'm gonna. I was thinking beat it, but I'll stay with it. I think I was trying to see if I could convince myself
that it was better than that.
Yeah, because I'm comparing it to other versions of Cinderella that I've seen, and I think it's better than Sneakerella, which is the Disney Plus movie, which maybe we'll talk about one day.
You mentioned that one, and that was one where I was like, I have to save Cameron from himself because no one is ever going to listen to an episode about Sneakerella. Because it came out in 2022 only on Disney Plus, and no one's ever heard of it.
Listen, get in the comments, ask for it. I know that's what you want, guys. And plus, it'll be very funny to make Josh watch it. It's a musical, too. I
do think this is better than the Cinderella musical I saw where they tried to establish a liberal democracy and then anointed the prince and princess. I don't know that it's better than like the normal Roger and Hammerstein version or like the Disney animation because there's not enough mice.
You're really courting the mouse vote, Josh.
Actually, no, I probably do like to watch this more than I like to watch the Disney animation. The Disney animation is more iconic and I have a lot of respect for it, but I think this is a bet more as a human viewer. I like it more.
But what about your mouse viewers, Josh? That's the question.
Well, that's why Carter is in it.
That's true. There's no mice in Sneakerella. It's a gender bent version. I'm just gonna keep talking about this, which is weird.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you feel really passionate about it, add it to our docket for New Pod Plus.
Ask me in the summer. But because I watched it too recently to have a correct opinion on it, I think.
And like I said, it's not necessarily gender bent because classic versions also feature boys as the main character.
Well, Sneakerella clearly is like deliberately an adaptation of the animated Disney version, and it is just a gender bent version. And all the characters are gender bent, so
that's all I have to say about Cinderella, I think.
Oh, my one question. Would you show this version of Cinderella to your child?
This movie? He did see probably half of it. Not that he can comprehend anything at the moment. I guess I don't have any objections to that, but I would also, it's not like on the bucket list now to make sure that he sees it.
Are you going to, so like, if you had to choose between the animated Disney version and this version to show him first, when he can comprehend it?
When he's very young, I would go with the animated Disney version.
Okay, that's fair, I guess.
Watching, reading, playing, anything else recently?
I just finished, about a week ago, the first Dungeon Crawler Carl book. I bought the second one.
I've been sort of interested in those. So you're going to read the second one? So you liked it?
Yeah, I did like it. It's a very quick and very easy read.
Yeah.
I'll be interested to see how it progresses, because all I've heard about it is that like it's a good book series, and despite it seeming like it's impossible to like keep upping the tension and whatnot and keep changing things and keeping things fresh, it actually does manage to do that. So I like that book.
It's always I don't want to buy it, but it's always checked out at the library, and I'm always also busy reading other things, so I just haven't gotten to it. I do find the whole lit RPG idea interesting, because at some point there's part of me where it hurts, because I'm like, stories should not be about numbers going up and rules.
I mean, it's not really
like it's like it just feels like a Reddit book genre.
I think he wrote it, online. It was published online first as like a
yeah.
It doesn't.
Well, it's like, I mean, I'm saying it's a part of a whole genre. I don't know if you're aware of it, called lit RPG. That's like similar ideas of like the character exists in a world with literal like RPG rules, like you level up and everyone in the world has levels and you gain skills at certain ranks and stuff.
Yeah. For me, when I'm reading this, like those elements do exist, but they kind of don't matter, I feel like, in a lot of ways. It does feel a little perfunctory, because I don't get the impression that I'm ever going to reach a point in the book where he's like going to do something and it's going to fail because his skill's not high enough. It's going to fail for other reasons.
Yeah. The other part of me is like, it bothers me that lit RPG is based on video game RPGs when they should be showing respect to their forebears of tabletop RPGs.
I mean, Josh,
and be based on those.
You have a computer, you have a keyboard, you have access to tabletop RPGs.
That's true. But then I'd be contributing to the downfall of literature, as I just established.
Well, it's like, it's got this weird like cycle where like, storytelling was adapted into being tabletop RPGs, which was adapted into video games, which is adapted back into literature, into storytelling.
Well, it is. I mean, it's all a cycle, because it's like RPGs are basically war games added freeform storytelling, which was always possible. And then that combination became video games. And now like RPGs that people play on the tabletop have taken like concepts from video games, like balance and class distinctions and stuff. So it's just a constant feedback loop, which I find fascinating. I've been playing Tomodachi Life, Living the Dream.
Several of my students have been playing that and showing me their very cursed creations of Weird Al Yankovic, House.
Have they made you?
No. It's mostly been The Impractical Jokers, House.
I didn't.
And Weird Al Yankovic.
Oh, nice. I think I added Weird Al Yankovic as a thing that people can say, like, oh, I love, like they can like tell other characters that they like Weird Al Yankovic, but I did not make him. And I've made People I Know and Leia Organa, Borat. I made Borat.
I like to imagine that you were like, okay, I made myself. Now the next person I want to make is not my wife, not anyone I know, not my son. It's going to be Borat and Leia.
I think it might have been just me and my wife, and then I made Borat, and then I made some other people I know.
Josh.
I can't remember. He was within the first
Why
five,
is Borat the first thing you like decide to make?
Because you can like, honestly, my logic was, because the new thing in this one is like, as they level up, you can give them more expressions they can say and add little quirks that make them behave more like their actual character. And so honestly, my logic was that Borat behaves very distinctly, so it will be obvious. It'll be easy to give him a lot of catchphrases and behavioral quirks and make him seem like the real thing.
That's true. He is just kind of behavioral quirks, the character.
He already says my wife, of course.
Yeah, I assume that's the first one you gave him.
And now when he greets people or when he eats or something, he says Yak Shamash. And my sister-in-law is in love with Mickey Mouse. Or no, Mickey Mouse is in love with her.
Is it going to be a Cinderella story? Because, I mean, like, marrying the mouse, that's moving on up.
Yeah, true. But that's really all I've been doing with my downtime these days. Nice. Okay, so think that's wrapping us up. Like we said last time, or at the top of the episode, we're very excited to do our first episode with guests, but just my life changes and things have delayed that, and we want to make sure it's a good one. So it will be War of the Worlds, the H.G. Wells novel, and the 1953 movie, plus maybe a smattering of others, depending on if anybody on the record feels like it. That will be coming out at some point soon. If you have listened to this point and have enjoyed yourself or have any thoughts or comments you want to leave, rate us on whatever platform you're using. You can email us at adaptivedifficultypod@gmail.com. We have a YouTube channel now, which is new, so you can subscribe to that, and we upload short clips from our show there. The name of the channel is just Adaptive Difficulty, like our show. Thank you for listening and for doing those things.
As we reach a close, we just want to say thank you to everyone who worked on the adaptation. Thank you for making the world a little bit artful. I was very surprised by this one. I'm glad it does exist, which is not something I can say about all versions of things that we've seen in this podcast. But thanks to everyone who worked on it. Thanks to you guys, thanks to the listeners. It is very helpful and encouraging to have people like, yeah, I listen to this and I appreciate what they have to say and can spend time and are willing to listen. We always appreciate you.